Hi, Read 585. This is your week 15 part 2 lecture talking about coaching strategies, and this is one of our final content lectures in the semester. So last week we really talked about coaching basics, looking at the 4-step process of collecting your data, scripting, observations, that kind of thing, and then using that data to plan your coaching conversations, doing your inquiry and reflection, and then lastly connecting it to PD and establishing some goals for further work and observations. This week we are taking it a step deeper and looking at more nuanced coaching strategies, ways to differentiate, and ways to do some team coaching. So we have 3 session objectives. First, to continue learning and discussing what makes an effective coach. Second, to identify differentiated coaching techniques for teams and individuals. Just like students in your classroom, you aren't working with teachers who have all the exact same needs, so you're going to need to differentiate based on learner needs, which will help for investment and motivation. And then our third objective is to apply these various techniques to plan effective coaching opportunities for your teaching candidate in assignment number 5. So first, I'm going to reactivate your schema on the 7 principles for literacy coaching that we learned about last week. So first, coaching requires that specialized knowledge, not only of the content area, but also for how to teach adult learners and then how to continue to develop yourself. Second, time working with teachers is the focus of coaching. So you need to balance your extra responsibilities so that you have the time and the capacity to focus on those teachers. Third, collaborative relationships are essential for coaching. So messaging what your purpose is, to be a thought partner and a collaborator, and even if that's not your natural tendency, to develop a professional development plan like I had so that you can help message that by using Weeek, soliciting their feedback, using more questions instead of directives. All of those things will help build your collaborative relationship. Fourth, coaching that supports student reading achievement focuses on a set of core activities. So that really should be your common purpose, is increasing student reading achievement. And the article this week, the Stover et al. Article, talked about how when that is your focus, teachers will be more invested. 5, coaching must be both intentional and opportunistic. So by intentional, you're planning your interactions and you're scripting your questions and your conversation. But at the same time, opportunistic, you may also just drop by to check in and be a listener, be an active listener. Coaches must be literacy leaders within the school. And then 7, coaching evolves over time. So those are the 7 principles we learned about last week. This week we are going to again dig deeper. I want to get started by actually having you do a quick write. Wow, if you've read the article from this week on differentiated coaching, you know that this is one of the strategies they mentioned. So I'm going to give you just a few minutes to quick write on this prompt. What type of literacy coach do you want to be? What types of learning opportunities and activities do you plan to implement? And what attributes or qualities of an effective coach will you embody? So take just a few minutes and think about you as a literacy coach and the type of coach you want to be and how that will look to teachers. All right, at this point you may want to pause the lecture so that you can continue doing your quick write. All right, I'm going to keep talking again. If you have not done your quick write, please pause the lecture so that you can do this as an anticipatory set to our lectures this week. All right, so what we're going to do is hold that thought that you wrote about in your quick write, and I want you to think about it as we go through the lectures and add to your idea of the type of coach that you want to be, and maybe add some key words to define your role as you learn about some different approaches through this lecture. So what is coaching? I'm actually going to be drawing from a professional development that I went to last November, and we talked a lot about coaching conversations. So it was actually at my dean training last year, and we talked a lot about the idea of what is coaching. Well, coaching is improving performance through changed behavior. So your role as a coach is to change teacher behavior so that they are improving their performance, and as a result, their students are learning more, and their performance is also increasing. So when you think about the 4 elements of reflective coaching that we learned about last week, observing their behavior, discussing the behavior, reflecting on the behavior, determining next steps and commitments to change their behavior, that's exactly the process to follow that will ultimately change their behavior. And that's the goal, is to make them more effective. Coaching is also developing someone's skills and knowledge through one-on-one training. It is goal-directed, and it's best if the teacher gives input on their goals. It is a collaborative discovery process, so it should not be a one-time event, but an ongoing process, which we've talked a lot about already. And it is a good way to provide outside eyes and ears. So when you are scripting an observation, and I gave you a lot of tools last week for observations, you're just providing that objective written dialogue of what is happening in the classroom, and then you're investigating it with them later from that outside perspective. So you're not judging or passing judgment on them. So what coaching is not, it's not being the trainer in all things. So you need to really take a lot of pressure off of yourself. It is important to have expertise and to have experience, but it's not realistic to expect yourself as the coach to know everything there is to know about teaching a variety of subject areas. What you do need to be skilled in is this process of reflective coaching and getting them to draw from their knowledge and experience to plan their changed behavior. It is also not just giving feedback. Just giving feedback isn't enough to change their behavior. It has to be ongoing, and it has to be more than just one isolated event. So what do good coaches do? Well, they have a clear vision of their end results. Just like with teaching, you want to have a clear vision of where you're going with your students, what the assessment looks like, what the project looks like, so you can backwards map from there. They also use specific, well-chosen words. So like I shared with you last week, I often script out the questions I'm going to use and kind of plan different directions that those questions are going to take me. They listen more than they talk. They paraphrase what they have heard. They formulate good questions that are open-ended and that elicit dialogue. And then they empower the coachee to think. And they know how to break down performance into critical attributes. So when you go in and observe a teacher, you know that classroom management is usually the first critical attribute. So looking at within classroom management, where is the knowledge or skill gap? What specific things can you work with them on? Once we get there, now we're looking at the instruction and how the instruction is being delivered. So as a coach, you need to be able to look at someone's performance and break it down into, what they have a foundation in, and then where they need to go from there. All right, good coaches also make those personal connections. They focus little on themselves. They secure buy-in. They let the coachee choose the learning path. They speak with credibility. Again, you don't have to be the expert on everything, but you should have some knowledge of what you're coaching on. All right, basic steps to good coaching. This should be a recap of what we discussed last week. So at the basis, you have plan and do and check. So you are planning your interactions with your teacher, you're planning when you're going to observe, you're planning your questions you're going to discuss, you do your plan, and then you check in on how the plan is going. You establish a clear goal with teacher input. You define the gap of the current reality and then what is needed to get to that goal. You analyze the data. You review and modify the goal. You identify necessary resources that may help the teacher. Are there online videos on Teacher Channel? Are there, different books or articles you could recommend? You develop the plan of action, and then you implement the plan. So those are the basic steps to good coaching. So coaches are tasked with developing expertise in their coachee by moving them through unconscious incompetence. So this is a state of not knowing what you don't know. So let's say you are teaching a teacher about wait time, right? They may have no knowledge of what wait time even is. So you need to explain to them that wait time is waiting 3 to 5 seconds after asking a higher order thinking question so that they have time to process. Then at the next step, you would go into conscious incompetence. So now they have some awareness of what wait time is, but they cannot competently implement that strategy. So they are in conscious incompetence. They are asking those high-level questions and they are not waiting 3 to 5 seconds. Maybe they're not waiting long enough. They're forgetting to do it. They need to have a reminder for themselves. Then we move into conscious competence. So here is where they are making a conscious effort to implement wait time. They're waiting, 3 to 5 seconds. They have a little reminder for them or timer or something. And then the goal is ultimately to get the teacher to unconscious competence. So whatever you're teaching them becomes habit and they don't consciously need to think about it any longer. So that is what coaches are tasked with. Not an easy process. One way to remember this is using the GROW acronym, and GROW stands for Goal, Reality, Options, and Will, or the way forward. So at the goal phase, you're involving the coachee in setting a goal. What do we need to accomplish during our conversation, or what are we working on, along with setting a clear performance goal. Or you might be checking in on an existing performance goal. For the reality, this step involves exploring the present situation to determine the current reality for the coachee and identifying any performance gaps preventing them from achieving the goal. For options, this step involves determining strategies and or actions that can be taken to meet the goal. And then the will or the way forward involves solidifying an action plan that outlines who will do what and by when. So you have your goal, you determine the current reality of where performance is, you create some options in order to make a plan, and then you solidify your plan and you move forward, denoting whose role will be what and by when. So I did want to take a few minutes to talk about directive and reflective coaching. And I don't know if you're familiar with the work by Jim Fay on Love and Logic, but I did a lot of reading on Love and Logic last summer in order to prepare some parenting workshops, and he outlines different types of parents. So you have your helicopter parents, you have your drill sergeant parents, and then you have your consultant parents. And this is, I thought, a good analogy for the different types of coaching. So with directive coaching, that is more of your drill sergeant, which could be very necessary in different times. And then with reflective coaching, that's more of your consultant coaching. So directive coaching are strategies and solutions that are suggested directly. You should do this, or you need to do this. Versus reflective coaching, you're generating those solutions through reflective questioning. So you're asking those deep and probing questions to get them to determine the strategy and the solution. Directive coaching over here, the coach is the one assuming responsibility for the outcome, since the coach is the one making the suggestion, whereas in reflective coaching, the coachee is the one taking ownership because they're the ones making the decisions and choosing the direction. So you can see how they would likely have more investment in this type of coaching style. Over here in directive coaching, the outcomes are produced quickly since the answers and directives are given immediately, whereas over here in reflective coaching, it may take a little longer since you're really doing an inquiry and you're exploring different options to produce results. In the directive coaching, the coach is acting more like an athletic coach, a mentor or trainer, or an expert who holds all of the answers, whereas over here in reflective coaching, you're acting more like a professional partner and walking along the coachee in a process of discovery. So with directive coaching, what is it? It is the directives, tactics, and strategies suggested for quick success related to knowledge and skills to be implemented. And the skills that you would need to use as a coach are answering questions, giving directions, advice, recommendations, and suggestions. You are imparting the information or the knowledge. You're insisting on a specific approach. You're also contributing alternatives and suggestions. The dangers of this type of coaching to be aware of is that you may overload the coachee with too much information. You also may create dependency on the coach. I know my first year as a coach, I was very likely to just swoop in kind of like the helicopter and fix whatever needed fixing and do it for them. I would write their lesson plans. I would create their assessments. I had a lot of empathy for them being new teachers at a new school. So as a result, I took on a lot of the work. I stole their struggle for them, so to speak. And as a result, they were very dependent upon me. And when I didn't do something for them, they just could not function. And your goal as a coach should be leading them to independence, not creating dependent behavior on you. Another danger of directive coaching is that you really are inhibiting their personal growth because you're neglecting to encourage them to self-reflect and apply the lessons learned to other situations and circumstances. You're also overinflating the coach's sense of self-importance. You are amplifying, as a result, your tendency to be directive. So this could lead to giving advice that is unsolicited, directing the conversation too much, or completely taking it over and imposing solutions. You could also be diminishing listening skills and then not listening to what the coachee is truly saying. So there are some dangers for using directive coaching. There are definitely times when it is necessary. So when you should use it is if the coachee really doesn't have the knowledge or skill set to contribute in that particular area. So you can ask all of these great reflective questions, but they're not going to have a lot of information to respond to you. Then that would be a good time just to go with directive coaching. Or if they don't have experience to draw from, then it would be best to just give them suggestions. If the coachee is lacking confidence and they can't confidently come up with some answers to reflective coaching, then you would use directive coaching. And then lastly, if the coachee doesn't appear to have a desire for coaching and they don't want to have that interaction with you and you're kind of hitting a wall, then it's just easier to be directive. And then there's also if the coachee is in danger of crossing ethical, legal, or professional guidelines, then you may just need to give them a directive if they're at the point of being on an improvement plan or a coaching plan, directives are probably best. And then lastly, if there is a sense of urgency, there should always be a sense of urgency, but if it's more of an emergency and action needs to happen ASAP, then it's best to have directive coaching. Reflective coaching, on the other hand, is more of that consultant approach. So you are raising the awareness of the individual being coached in order to encourage him or her to take responsibility for improving his or her own knowledge or skill set to achieve even better performance. The skills required are very different from directive coaching. You need to foster an empathetic and trusting relationship as the basis for your coaching conversations. You need to ask open-ended questions and actively listen to the responses by effectively using wait time to encourage responses. You should be checking for understanding by paraphrasing and summarizing. You should also be eliciting new perspectives and approaches to be explored, encouraging self-reflection and avoiding judgments. Vulnerabilities of this coaching style to be aware of include asking too many questions or asking closed questions that yield little information, providing suggestions concealed as questions. Oh, so have you tried this? That's actually more of a directive than a reflective question. Drawing conclusions for the coachee. Don't steal their struggle. Make them do the work and the cognitive lifting. And then being led by your curiosity instead of letting the coach lead. So when should you use reflective coaching? If the coachee has the knowledge and skill set necessary to identify the new or alternate perspective, if you want to foster deeper understanding of skills in the coachee, if you're coaching high performing teachers, use reflective coaching, and then to encourage coachees to take even more ownership for their continued growth and learning. So that's a little bit about the difference between reflective and directive coaching. I want you to kind of synthesize what was just said and perhaps add a few key statements or verbs or traits or attributes to your quick write about what you learned here. Feel free to pause it and do that now. All right, and I'm going to keep talking about the assigned readings for the week, starting with differentiated coaching, fostering reflection with teachers. I absolutely love this article. I think it is my favorite for the semester, and I definitely gained a lot thinking about next year for my staff and how I want to invest them more in their professional development as well as provide more differentiated opportunities. So within this article, they talked about the goal is providing professional development for the individual teachers you coach. They had 3 goals in the article: to discuss the role of the literacy coach, to describe differentiated coaching techniques for a diverse group of teachers, and to explain how teacher reflection can be a catalyst for change. I really enjoyed the introduction of the article. They reminded us that the focus of PD should be that embedded approach. They also talked about teacher-centered, differentiated professional development that fosters teacher reflection and how that cycle of demonstration, observation, and reflection is most effective. They discussed the need to examine student learning outcomes, and that is going to be your common goal with the teachers. So I know a few of you are reluctant to work with teachers that you feel may be resistant to you, but always going back to the common goal or to the why are we here? Well, to advance student learning, and using that common goal, you can hopefully invest the teachers. And so they mentioned that when the coach and the teacher focus on those learning outcomes of students, the teachers develop a vested interest in coaching and then start to see the benefit of reflection within their practice. And they went on to say that oftentimes such awareness inspires teachers to continue their engagement in professional development and reflection. They became stakeholders in their own learning, and they even sought ongoing support from their literacy coach. So you definitely want to get them to that level of investment that they're actually seeking you out instead of you trying to track them down on their lunch hour. They mentioned how the process is really observing the teaching practice, having the coaching conversation, and then doing reflection, which we've talked about before. They discussed how that one-size-fits-all approach leads to teacher resistance, and it's not effective. And then lastly, teachers must have a voice in their learning process. It shouldn't be a top-down approach to professional development. All right, I love this quote that they cited from Tomlinson, Carol Ann Tomlinson, who's big in the world of differentiation, that the learning happens within the teachers and not to them. That reminds me of a book chapter I read this past week that comes from the Golden Circle and the Why Are We Here, and how when your teachers aren't invested in the why we're here and you're not focusing and messaging the why, you are having to do manipulation instead of inspiration. So the goal would be to inspire your teachers to learn and grow and develop through these coaching conversations versus manipulating them to be participating in them. So as you know, not all teachers are created alike, and as a result, we need to differentiate our learning for them to provide multiple options for taking in information, making sense of ideas, and sharing the information learned. So a lot of great points on differentiation for students and how this can be applied to working with teachers from Tomlinson and McTeague. They talked about the 3 different approaches that you would use with your students and applying those to teachers. So you can differentiate the content being presented. Maybe this teacher needs academic discourse and needs to build discussion in the classroom to make it more student-centered. But this teacher already has that. They don't need that piece. Maybe they need more cooperative learning structures where the students are actually producing output in collaboration with each other, not just through discussion, but in written work. So you can differentiate the content being presented. Second, you can differentiate the process in which the information is conveyed and learned. So like I showed you my professional development plan last week, where I had different teachers grouped and I had a different process for how I would be working with them. Some might need weekly observations. Some may just need every other week observations. Some teachers I may model in their classroom, or we may co-teach a lesson, different things like that. You can also differentiate the product. So how the teachers take what they learn and implement. Maybe someone is ready to do the day book or the notebook mentioned in this article, whereas others are not. So, how the authors define literacy coaching. Simply, they say it's the embedded professional development focused on reflection. It's built upon a foundation of trust and collaboration. Literacy coaching is a process in which the teacher and coach engage in kid watching, remember that being a noticing teacher, and making inquiries into the literacy learning of students. These inquiries are the basis of coaching observation. So you're doing your observation, you're collecting the data on what's happening in the classroom. I think it's very important to notice the student behavior sometimes more so than the teacher behavior, because sometimes teachers, there are many reasons to focus on the student behavior, but ultimately the goal is for students to learn the content. So the best way to measure whether or not they're learning the content is to monitor their behavior, jot down what their written responses are, or verbal responses are, and analyze those to see if they did in fact achieve the goal or objective for the lesson. And by doing that, it sometimes puts the teacher more at ease too, because you're not so focused on what the teacher said and did, but you're more focused on what the students said and did, and then how the teacher can maybe change their behavior to get a different result out of the students. So focusing on what the kids are doing and then using it as an inquiry for your conversation. Notice the emphasis on a foundation of trust and collaboration. I love Patrick Lencioni and his model of the 5 dysfunctions of a team. I definitely do a review of this with our staff every year in August, and we constantly talk about it. Ignore the spelling error there. Interesting. So with this is trust is the foundation of an effective team. You have to have trust, because if you don't have trust, you're not going to engage in healthy conflict. Not malicious conflict, but everyone putting their ideas out there and discussing, what is or isn't the best approach. And if people don't get, their ideas out, they're not going to be able to buy in and make a commitment. And we need to make a commitment in order to be held accountable to a commitment. And then we can't measure our results if we haven't done all of these steps. So it's a great book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, but basically trust is the foundation, and it must be there, or else we're not engaging in the kind of dialogues. We're very guarded in what we're saying and not engaging in the dialogue that needs to happen. So just wanted to point that out. So to make change, coaches must build trust, not evaluate, admit that they don't always know the answer, invite inquiry in the classroom, actively engage in reflection with teachers, ask questions, and provide observational feedback, and lead teachers toward self-discovery. So the goal is going through a process with them that they are then able to replicate and do independently without you. So effectiveness in your job begins when the teachers engage in the practices on their own. So I know someone had the question on our SurveyMonkey survey of how do I evaluate the effectiveness of my professional development? Well, there are really several ways to evaluate that, but the biggest one is looking for changed behavior in the teachers is your observational data showing that they are actually applying what they learned from that professional development. You can also have them complete exit surveys at the end of your professional development, but is that truly going to show whether or not they implement anything from what they learned? So the typical coaching model cycle is to demonstrate, observe, and reflect. And when you demonstrate, the coach and the teacher can even alternate between teaching and observing. Together, the coach and the teacher participate and determine how teaching decisions influence students. So another level of the typical cycle is looking at the student learning outcomes, and when this is considered, teachers develop a vested interest in coaching. I already mentioned this. Change occurs when the teachers observe their own practice. So let's take a look at the actual differentiated approaches that were used. So first we have Brian, who is a school-based literacy coach in an elementary school, and he is working with Martha, a veteran teacher of 30 years and a colleague, and he is trying to coach her. They did some alternating of teaching and observing. He modeled some exemplary teaching while other teachers observed. And basically he realized that this model he was using with the other teachers didn't work for Martha because she's already very confident and a knowledgeable teacher. So he started to ask himself these questions: in what ways can I make a difference in Martha's classroom? So he decided to try and use writing as a way to foster reflection with an already confident teacher. So he took the idea of quick writes, which I had you do in the beginning, and he had Martha use quick writes to reflect on her teaching, and in turn used her reflections to understand her beliefs about teaching. And so on page 502, the second paragraph, or the first full paragraph, it talks about the process that Martha followed. So her quick write followed a pattern of first summarizing an event that happened in the classroom. So here's what happened. Next, she thoughtfully reflected on how she made an impact on this event. So how did she influence it? After acknowledging her influence, she made a list of questions that she used as a guide to push her thinking about pedagogy. So, and then finally, she made a note of different topics she could pursue further with Brian as her literacy coach. And then during the debriefing sessions, Martha would read from her daybook and use her reflections as the basis of discussions with Brian. And I think this is a very valuable format to use, having the experienced teacher do more pre-work on their end before coming to you, because I know a lot of times when I work with experienced teachers, they come to you and they expect you to give them the information that they need and come up with something that's going to just revolutionize their teaching. Well, a lot of times there isn't something that's necessarily going to revolutionize their teaching, and it might be harder for you to identify that. So having them do even more reflection than you would have your novice teacher do ahead of time, I think is a great approach. And it allowed Martha to set the agenda for the conversation. And I want to start having my teachers do that more. Instead of me setting the agenda, I want them to set the agenda. And she was the one driving the conversation with Brian. So they didn't give us as much information in the article as how it was specifically used. I really kind of wanted to see an example. But again, I think this is something you could take and definitely apply to your work with more experienced teachers. And I think it definitely helps with the goal of making them a reflective practitioner and doing a little bit more of the thinking work before they even come to you. Next, we meet Rebecca, who is in an elementary school, and I think this is my personal favorite strategy that I am definitely going to use next year. So basically with Rebecca, they made a survey. And that first survey is in Figure 1. And the purpose of the first survey was to determine the literacy strengths and needs of each teacher. So this could be done in the spring or over summer or in the fall. And it essentially served as a data point and as a pre-assessment that would show the validity of staff development sessions when teachers completed the same survey at the end of the school year. So that's a great practice as well. It helped them to see trends across the school and the grade level teams. And then it really provided them a way to design professional development seminars to meet the needs of teachers. So then once they did that first survey, they went in and did a second survey where they had to rank different topics that they felt would meet their professional needs. So they looked at the responses from the first survey and was like, here is kind of the trend. These are a bunch of strategies that might help with the trend we're seeing, and then had teachers rank the topics. Then they presented the different topics throughout the year and gave teachers choice as to which ones they would want to attend. And they set the expectation that you must attend at least 5 different sessions, while 80% of their teachers attended more sessions. So I think that shows great investment and a great interest. And then it really helped the teachers feel appreciated. They felt like they were treated like professionals, and they felt like their opinions and experiences were valued. They even had the comment that no one ever asked me what I wanted to learn about. There were so many opportunities, and I got to choose the ones that were right for me as a teacher. So this approach really fostered a sense of community. It helped the teachers feel valued and appreciated. I love the use of the survey, and I'm definitely going to incorporate that. Lastly, we learn of Karen, who used videotapes for personal evaluation. Again, she's an elementary school coach, and they had their teachers do a book study of several different things over the summer. They did Reading with Meaning, excellent book, and then Strategies That Work. And then in August, they came together to create personal goals with the teachers. And then they did kind of a baseline observation video assessment where Karen scripted both as a backup and also as a text outline for later reflection. They kind of started with that first initial videotaping as baseline data, and then Karen met with each teacher for 30 minutes after that data was collected to discuss what went well and what needed work to help the teachers start the reflecting process. And then they outlined the steps to follow with this. So on page 506, it mentions the steps. So first, watching the lesson. Second, reviewing the notes, the scripted notes. Third, watching the tape again and mapping each student's involvement. So analyzing the types of questions being asked of them, their body language. So really focused on that kid watching piece. Then meet with colleagues to discuss the initial assessment, and then reflect in writing before meeting with the coach again. So I love again that the teachers are having to do so much pre-work before coming to that conversation. So instead of expecting the coach to tell them what the goal should be and where they should go next, they're having to establish that for themselves. So these are all 3 great practices to make your teachers more reflective, and hopefully you can take something from them to apply. Let's shift and talk through literacy learning through team coaching. This is a very recent article from the reading teacher, and in the introduction, you get to overhear a conversation between the teachers meeting the coach for the first time, and they say, "Let me make sure I heard you right. You aren't here to tell us what to do. Our team will get to decide what we are going to learn about." So that's definitely a paradigm shift we need to embrace with professional development and teacher coaching, is having them, valuing their experiences and their knowledge and putting the reflection on them so that they can come up with their own professional development goals. So effective methods for teacher learning. In the introduction of this article, they review these different components, and the first one being ongoing. So with the approach from this article, you are doing uninterrupted support for 9 weeks. The second effective method for teacher learning is job embedded. So with this team coaching approach, it is on-site with your own students and your own team. Third is that it should be collaborative. So here they are very engaged in learning with their colleagues. Fourth, it should be reflective, so they're continually reflecting on the students and their goals. And then lastly, teacher learning should be inquiry-based via self-directed learning. So teachers very much need to be involved in their learning. It shouldn't be a top-down mandate. It should be collaborative learning to invest the teachers, and then that's critical for the implementation. So here is the framework from the article, and it shows up here the role of the literacy coach. So they are going to work with a cohort of about 4 to 8 teachers. 8 teachers sounds like a lot to me, so when trying this out, I would start small with maybe 3 to 4 teachers. And then you're going to facilitate the group for a 9-week cycle. You're going to meet with each cohort member individually at least once during each of the phases. So here's phase 1, here's phase 2, here's phase 3, and each phase is 3 weeks. Now the cohort members, they have coverage during their coaching time. So you are providing them with a protected time when they can really focus on the coaching conversation. They also get recertification points at the end of the cycle, so seeing if there's a way that this can count for continuing education clock hours. And then they also are asked to evaluate the coaching experience, so they really give input and feedback. So week 1 is the inquiry week. It's just 1 day for 1 hour, and you're really giving an overview of what the study of inquiry is and analyzing student data, answering questions of the participants, giving any research related to the questions, and then options for application. Week 2, for 1 day, 1 hour, you're doing the research part. So you're sharing research that addresses the inquiry topic and providing graphic organizers to record the group's thinking. Week 3 is the lesson development. So you are developing 2 to 3 lessons that will be implemented in a teacher's classroom during the next week by the coach. So together you're creating a lesson plan so that in week 4, during the modeling and debriefing, they're actually observing the lesson in a selected classroom and debriefing about student engagement during the lesson, how the inquiry topic was modeled, and objectives for the next lesson. Then in week 5, there's a mid-cycle reflection. So they are completing a mid-cycle community coaching reflection form and discussing as a group what has been learned so far and what support is still needed. So with however you're structuring your coaching interactions, you definitely want to find a time and a place to do this kind of midpoint check-in to monitor how it's going before you get to week 9 and find out, oh, it didn't go so well. Week 6 is research, so sharing research that addresses the inquiry topic and providing graphic organizers so they can take notes on that. Week 7, developing lessons again. So developing 2 to 3 lessons that will be implemented in a teacher's classroom during the next week by the coach. And then again, the coach is modeling and they're debriefing, and then they are reflecting on what is learned. So this is a 9-week cycle that follows that, observation and reflection format that will be very helpful to coaching teachers. So that's all I wanted to highlight for you from the second article. There are plenty of resources out there on coaching. Classroom Instruction That Works by Robert Marzano outlines different effective practices for the classroom. So if you aren't familiar with what you could coach your teacher on, that would be a great starting point to find strategies. Leadership Coaching for Educators. Coaching the New Leadership Skill is from Ed Leadership. Creating Dynamic Schools Through Mentoring, Coaching, and Collaboration. Leader as a Coach, Strategies for Coaching and Developing Others. Also, at the end of that differentiated coaching article, they have a bunch of IRA published texts that you could take a look at on coaching. The Literacy Coach's Companion, the Literacy Coach's Game Plan, the Literacy Coach's Survival Guide, Practical Literacy Coaching, Surviving but Not Yet Thriving, Essential Questions and Answers for Experienced Literacy Coaches. So there's a lot of resources out there on coaching. All right, back to our objectives. Hopefully you feel like you've got more information on what makes an effective coach and you've started to jot down things you'd like to apply to your practice as a coach. We've learned about those differentiated coaching techniques of daybooks and the survey and the videotaping to help with teams and individuals. And now you should be better prepared to start working on assignment number 5. To launch you, I have a few questions for you to think about that came from the training I went to. First, how will teachers improve if they don't have a coach to help them grow? Second, how many lives can be changed if we all commit to being real coaches? So getting your priorities in order. Third, how much value can we add to the lives of our students if our teachers are even better at their craft? So essential questions to think about as you frame your role as a coach. Quality coaching does take time, though. It also takes skill and practice and dedication and vision and perseverance and preparation and service to others. Something to think about, though, there was a moment in sports when employing a personal coach was unimaginable. Then there came a time when not doing so was unimaginable. We care about results in sports, and if we care half as much about results in our schools, we should reach the same conclusion. Having no coach is unimaginable. So hopefully you can find a way to develop your coaching expertise either in a traditional literacy coaching role or as a grade level teacher or experienced teacher in your building. This is the end of week 15 and we only have one more week, so I will see you back in week 16. Have a great week.